So our first speaker, would you please welcome the Chief Executive of Irish Life, Gerry Hassett.
Minister, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you all to our conference on the future of pensions in Ireland. In particular, I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Joan Burton, who's the Minister for Social Protection. Minister, you're most welcome. You and your colleagues have taken office at one of the most critical moments in the history of the state. I know you face many challenges, particularly in the weeks coming up to the next budget in December, and I know I speak for everyone here in wishing you well in your endeavours. I'd also like to welcome the many brokers and pension practitioners who join us here today. Helping people provide for the future is what we do day in, day out. We understand pensions and the impact that sensible retirement planning can have on the quality of life for middle-income workers and their families in their later years. Now, some people say that we only look after the needs of the wealthy, but the facts don't bear this out. 85% of Irish Life's pension customers earn €70,000 or less. We deal with the workers of Middle Ireland, many of whom are at the front line of recent austerity measures. Now, we've a tremendous lineup of speakers today, and my job over the next 10 minutes or so is to give a strategic context around the future of pensions and suggest some solutions. Minister Burton will have a chance to respond after me, and I'm certainly interested in hearing her views. I've met the Minister on several occasions, and I've been very impressed with her determination to listen and to understand the pensions brief from every dimension. I suppose the first point I'd like to make is that there's only three certainties in life: debt, taxes, and the pensions time bomb. Now, it's too early in the morning to be talking about debt and taxes, so we'll focus on the pensions time bomb. And there are several things about this that we know to be certain. The first is that Ireland may be a young country today, but it's getting older. There's 6 of us working for every 1 in retirement now. That will halve in the next 20 years. We're also living longer. So if you're lucky enough to live to age 65, my actuarial colleagues tell me you're likely to live for a further 16 or 20 years. And I suppose the other fact is that whilst the state pension is a valuable benefit, for most people it's not enough to live on. So someone earning €60,000 a year can expect a drop in income in retirement of up to 80% if they rely solely on the state pension. And with the pressure on public finances and the pressure on the demographics, it's inevitable that the state pension will erode in real terms, as indeed the age at which it is received has already been extended. So clearly these three factors combine to create a major funding challenge for Ireland Inc. into the future. However, proper long-term planning in our public policy can make this challenge manageable. That's if we start planning today. And encouraging people to plan for themselves to reduce the burden on the state has to be part of that solution. Now, quite properly, the government today is obsessed with the 15 billion fiscal adjustment that's required between now and 2014. However, there's a real risk that in solving today's problem, we create an even bigger problem for the future. Many of us believe that the seeds of Ireland's demise were sown long before the crash, in the early days of the Celtic Tiger, around 2000 and 2001, when we began to spend money we simply didn't have. And I genuinely believe we're making the same mistakes today in the area of pensions. Every single policy measure of recent years has been negative, and it's created a crisis of confidence in pensions. Recent Irish Life customer research indicates that almost 1/4 of our customers are considering either reducing or suspending payments into their pension in the next 12 months, and that also bears out our experience of the past 12 months. And what an appalling vista it would be if the youth of Ireland, who inherited negative equity from the generation before them, were themselves condemned to poverty in retirement. In the excesses of the Celtic Tiger, we had people borrowing money they couldn't afford to invest in dreams that couldn't be realised. Pension customers are different and should be supported. Even in the teeth of recession, they are prepared to put something aside today so that they can enjoy their retirement and not become a burden on the state. For the workers of Middle Ireland, and remember, 85% of our pension customers earn €70,000 a year or less, retirement planning is a noble cause. And I believe it is in society's interest to support these people today in their honest endeavour and their hopes and dreams for the future. Unfortunately, these middle-income workers don't feel value today. In a recent Irish Life survey, 70% of middle-income workers said they did not believe the government was actively trying to encourage them to save for their retirement. Now, the current programme for government sets an objective of rebuilding a broken society. And in the introduction, it quotes Albert Einstein. Learn from yesterday, live for today, and hope for tomorrow. And that's why I'm calling on government today to give clarity to the workers of Middle Ireland that it will continue to support them in planning for their retirement and allow them to hope for their futures. Of course, the reality is that every section of society has to make a contribution in a time of national crisis. I fully accept that. And the plain fact of the matter is that the pensions community is being asked to fund about 1 billion of the total 15 billion fiscal adjustment. And that's a significant adjustment in anyone's language. We signed up for this and we're working with government to see how we can deliver. In addition to this 1 billion annual saving, we then had the recent pensions levy from which a further 1.8 billion contribution is expected over the next 4 years. The pensions levy has had such a devastating impact, not just because of the 1.8 billion reduction in all our pension funds, but because it's undermined any remaining confidence in retirement planning. Pensions generally, public and private, are long-term contracts of trust, and it's incredibly difficult to remedy a breach of trust. It's the latest in a long line of negative signals that being sensible today is not valued by the state. Now, I've heard many commentators suggest that the levy was actually originally suggested by the industry, and I'm glad to set the record straight here. The idea of a levy has been around for 20 years. In fact, the Pensions Board is currently funded by a levy. And it is true that some in the industry did suggest a lower percentage levy as an alternative to a change in tax relief. However, the government has introduced a levy, not as an alternative, as was suggested, but as an additional measure with no commitment to retain tax relief at the marginal rate. Effectively, it's a double whammy, and completely at odds with what was originally intended. But that's history, and we need to deal with today. The simple fact is this: the chronic lack of confidence in future incentives for retirement planning is contributing to a record level of workers stopping paying into their pensions. In turn, this is generating surplus flows to the Exchequer over and above those projected in the 15 billion National Recovery Plan. A recent analysis carried out by Milliman Actuarial Consultants has indicated that even if the government did nothing else in the area of pensions, it would achieve over 90% of the savings required in 2011 and 2012 in relation to the 1 billion goal. And that's before we even consider the levy. Now, that's a very significant conclusion, so I'll just repeat that. Even if the government introduces no new pension initiatives in the budget, it will achieve over 90% of the savings required in 2011 and 2012. Now, whilst this is good news for the Exchequer in the short term, it's bad news for all of us in the long term. The government is relying on workers stopping their pensions and thus increasing tax revenue. That's going to store up even bigger problems for the Exchequer in the future. And that's why I think we've an ideal opportunity today to step back from the fray and hopefully and consider what's in the best interests of Ireland Inc. And hopefully today's conference will stimulate some ideas. Now, the recent National Pensions Framework recommends reducing tax relief to a hybrid rate of 33%. I believe that that would be a retrograde step. Most of us in the room are professional financial planners. We strive to offer best advice at all times and are bound by various codes of conduct. I think it would be very difficult for most financial planners to recommend to their customers to lock money away for 20 or 30 years with relief at, say, 33%, when there's every chance that that income could be taxed in retirement at 41% or more. There are simply more attractive short-term savings options available, and I think professional advisors would be bound to recommend them. This would not be in the long-term interests of the state and would inevitably impose an increasing burden on the first pillar, which is the state pension. Yes, tax relief at the marginal rate is an attractive incentive, but you need an attractive incentive if you are expected to put your money away for 20 or 30 years. And we need to be honest here. I think when discussing tax relief, too many commentators think about Michael Fingleton's 27 million pension pot, rather than the 85% of our customers, the middle income workers, who earn 70 grand a year or less. And these days, the marginal rate of tax kicks in at 32,800, so reducing tax relief will undoubtedly hit the middle income worker. So I would urge the government to give a commitment to retaining relief at the marginal rate for middle income workers. I also agree that we need to do more for lower paid workers and women who have less opportunity to build a pension pot given the more stop-start nature of their working career. I think we need to be innovative here, and I do think that some of the ideas contained in the National Pensions Framework can provide a solution. My other primary recommendation is around the concept of equity. Now, we need to ensure that the scarce reliefs are widely available and not the domain of the few. The state cannot continue to support wealth management type incentives in the current climate, and the various measures of recent budgets have quite rightly closed off these loopholes. However, it's vital that middle income workers continue to be given every incentive to plan for their retirement. We need equity between defined contribution members and defined benefit members. Now, I meet pension trustees every week, and I'm very sympathetic to the concerns of defined benefit schemes. The recent decision by the trustees of the Tara Mine scheme to cut benefits in retirement by 10% is a devastating blow to the workers involved. And it's perhaps only a precursor of things to come, particularly once trustees come to grips with the downstream impact of the recent levy. However, the simple fact is that most defined contribution schemes are equally underfunded. The underperformance of various markets in recent years, over the past decade, and continued low interest rates have left most defined contribution holders significantly underfunded. Most of the public debate centres on defined benefit, but I believe that the needs of the defined contribution workers also need to be. The other area of equity is between the public and the private sector. Now, as you know, the public sector pensions are funded on a pay-as-you-go basis, and this represents its very own pensions time bomb. A recent review by the Department of Finance indicated that pensions in payment to public servants grew by around 70% since 2006, from 1.4 billion to 2.4 billion. So pensions in payment now represent 16% of the entire public sector wage bill. And there are now 2.5 active public servants for every one in retirement. And within a couple of decades, there's actually likely to be more public servants in retirement than working. So serious reform is required here if another fiscal black hole is to be avoided. The average retirement income to public servants is €22,500 a year, not including the state pension. This equates to a fund of about €700,000, which is about 5 times more than the average fund of €150,000 for the private sector worker in a defined contribution scheme. Now, the programme for government proposes a maximum limit of €60,000 per annum on any public sector pension. And if we're going to have equity between the public and the private sector, then I'm assuming that the government is also proposing a €60,000 limit for the private sector. However, where pension practitioners do have a problem here is around the basis in which this income is converted into a notional lump sum for defined contribution workers. The current factor of 20 times is nowhere near the market rate. Most of us in this room would love to provide an income in retirement using such a factor, but it's simply not possible. A recent independent study conducted for PIBA concluded that for a public servant retiring at age 60, the relevant factor is actually between 30 to 40 times. And, you know, if you were to use those factors, it would indicate that the current maximum fund threshold of 2.3 million may not actually be that far off the mark. So in conclusion, I'd like to reiterate a couple of points. Providing incentives for middle-income workers to fund for their retirement is a noble cause and represents good long-term public policy. 85% of the people who avail of this incentive earn €70,000 or less, and reducing tax relief will hit these middle-income workers disproportionately. Second point to be clear is the pensions community is playing its part and contributing its share to the €15 billion National Recovery Programme. Even excluding the pensions levy, which had been suggested as an alternative to tax relief, the government is 90% of their way towards this target. And there are sensible ideas emerging that eliminate some of the excesses of the past and ensure that scarce reliefs can be used equitably and efficiently. We're passionate about pensions in Irish Life. For generations, we've helped over 1 million middle-income workers plan for a peaceful retirement. And it greatly saddens me that confidence in the future of pensions retirement planning is so low right now. I think it's in the interest of everyone in society that we build collective hope in our shared future, and that's why it's vital that the government commits to support Middle Ireland to plan for their retirement. You see, the fundamentals of retirement planning have changed. It's no longer about what age we can retire at. It's more than ever about what income we can afford to retire at. Thank you very much.